This is The Final Word. Geoff Lemon and Bharat Sundaresan. We're sitting in Wanaka, the South Island of New Zealand, and very, very pleased to have sitting across the table from us Glenn Turner. 41 tests for New Zealand, 7 test hundreds, 3 one-day hundreds, and maybe more importantly, 455 first-class matches. Almost entirely as an opener, a bit over 34,000 runs at an average of 49.7. You can't really argue with those numbers. First of all, Glenn, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. Now, if you were talking to Jeffrey Boycott, he would say, yes, and I open the batting as well. Does that give me a few more? A higher average?
Well, I think you're pretty much at a 50 with a 49.7. I think it's safe enough to round that up with opening in England across the course of a couple of decades. But the place where we are, we're sitting by the lake in Wanaka. Bharat and I have been driving around the South Island the last few days. This is rugged country. It's mountainous. The snow's starting to come down. Even though we're only halfway through March, you can see it on the top of some of the mountains. It's uncompromising country. I was wondering if there's any symbolism there in what drew you to put down your roots here and make yourself part of this country.
Well, I'm a Dunedinite going back, but my parents and that brought me up around here. We had an old dunger of a caravan and, you know, a car that Father used to tease us with and say when we went up one of these steep hills, I don't know if we're quite going to make it, we're down to our last gear, you know, and you had to double declutch and all that. But coming up round the southern lakes of New Zealand has always been deep in me, and we would take turnabout by going down to Milford Way with Te Anau, Manapuri, and then the next year we would come up to Wakatipu and Wanaka. And then the following year we might go up to the other ones, you know, Pukaki and Tekapo and Mount Cook area and so on. So we would rotate it, and I did a lot of trout fishing as well. But my other brothers are better at fly fishing than me. I was a thread liner and out there doing a bit of trolling and so on. But yeah, so I decided a few decades ago that I would throw the anchor out here eventually. And this is it. My wife and I have decided that we're going nowhere else now, other than on holiday for a bit of a change. That's about it. Yeah.
So it's in you in some way, this country from a
yeah.
age.
Well, we're Greens in terms of looking after the environment. I mean, none of the political parties, of course, are ideal, but it's just that looking after the natural environment has always been something for me. My brother Brian, he's a poet and a writer. He was, what do you call when you get the top job?
Poet laureate.
Poet laureate, yeah, for a while and so on. And he was very much into landscapes, and his poetry resembled that. So yeah, it's, put it this way, you can rely on the environment more than humanity.
Is cricket part of that? I mean, because in a way, cricket's a subversion of the natural world. You take a piece of land and you make it completely flat, and you grow nice, neat grass on it, and all the rest of it. That's not really. It's not really natural. It's like a swimming pool. It's a kind of artificial natural body. But you're still out there in the elements. You're still needing the soil to play its part, and the clouds and the wind and the weather to play its part. Was there something in that attracted you to the game?
Yeah, well, possibly so. I've always felt that cricket reflects society, particularly more than other games, and that's probably because it's played over such a long period of time, and especially the longer form of the game, and that's why I don't know whether you're going to get on to this about 20 over stuff and 50 over cricket. You can have a game of cricket. You know, your bowlers bowl their 10 overs. It gives them a bit more of a show, and the middle order coming in has probably got more than half a dozen balls to face and so on. But yeah, and of course, yeah, one of the arguments for the longer form of game as it gives you more time to reflect, conditions change, whether you're chasing a target, whether you're defending a target, whether you're setting a target. So tactically, and then the conditions over 5 days alter so much, both pitch and atmospheric conditions. So it represents, as you indicate, the environment as well as the behaviour of human beings of the day.
Going back to your early days, though, for a country which defines itself with its rugby team and playing rugby, you didn't play a lot of rugby during the winter, did you? You were into hockey, and I was reading that so were your brothers. They played a lot of hockey as well in the winter.
Well, there's probably two reasons for that. I did play a short amount of rugby, but I'm not exactly physically made for the game, and there's no guessing which position I played in, halfback, but that was a limited period. And then it just happened to be that the school teacher at our school at the time was a hockey man, and so I got into hockey, and I got as far as South Island before I took off to the UK to play cricket. And my brother Brian, he played for New Zealand for a while, and Greg actually he was a golfer. You're all nodding, so you've obviously done your homework on this.
Yep. We've done a fair bit.
I'm jumping ahead a bit, am I? In New Zealand, as a young lad, the summer sport was cricket. So it's probably no surprise. And when I went to secondary school, my brother Brian he's 3 years older than me, and he was established in both first 11s, hockey and cricket. And so I wondered if that's why I didn't face any bullying. And even when I first went there, in your first day, they took your cap and took the little on the top of it off, and there was ducking. Fortunately, I didn't get ducked. They just fill up a basin of water and tip you upside down, and put you into it.
Better in the basin than elsewhere.
You're what's a third former was known as a turd former,
Right.
But I didn't cop much of that, and I think it was because of him. But where I'm getting to with this, with my cricket, is that I got in the first 11 very early on. Brian told me later that there were one or two in the team and said, "Oh, hang on, what's this guy doing here? He's just a kid, He's just..." And he said, "Well, because he can play." And so so that helped, I suppose. And then when you got a few runs, you justified the selection.
Yeah.
So it started early for me.
Being a kid who can play is a thread through that early part of your career. I mean, I think it's quite extraordinary in a way that you, according to my maths, you head off to England at 19 the first time. You turn 20 you play your first game, your first class game in England the day after your 20th birthday when you played for the MCC against Oxford University, I think it was, and you play one other first class game in that first season for Worcester against the touring Pakistani team, and get Hanif Mohammed out, which is one of a quirk I love with your off breaks. Picked up didn't make a lot of runs in that game, but you took 4 wickets.
I wanted to tell you that. Because, batsmen like to boast about any bowling they've done. And yes, because you had to qualify residentially for a year before you could play county cricket at that time, I was the last year that happened.
So I was wondering why you didn't play. So did you play second 11 in that first season?
Yes, indeed. But I'd already played 3 first-class seasons back here in New Zealand.
Absolutely. Started at 17, didn't you?
But I wasn't a ready-made test player. Now, if I'd gone a year later, I would have been having to compete with guys who were already playing for their country, and I would have been struggled to get a job, or so timing was fortuitous in that sense. But just coming back to the 3 for 17, I think it was actually, is that they were scoring plenty, and the captain was obviously looking around, who are we going to bowl next, you see. So it was me, and I was very conscious of Hanif Mohammed, who was at the non-strikers end when I came on to bowl, because he was staring at me as I came in, and I was just bowling off spinners, and he obviously wanted to see what I did, and he itching to get down the other end. And first ball, I bowled to him. He came down and went over the sight screen, 6. Yeah. But it lulled him into a false sense of security.
It was the honey trap.
What happened is he came down to the next one and ran past it and was stumped. Derek Isles bowled me. Well, I don't know how many, he got plenty. So, yeah, but of course, I mean, it was a very deceptive delivery, as you can imagine. I just dropped my arm a little bit. Instead of it biting and turning back, it skidded on. So he played for the bit of turn, went past the outside edge, came out of his crease. So he was done in the flight. Yes. Yeah. And just in addition to that story is that many moons later, I was doing some television work in Pakistan, and this guy came up to me at the start of play. You know, you get one or two of the administrators or whatever out in the middle, and I was going to do a pitch report. Anyway, he said, "You may not remember me now," he said, "but you got me out." I was feeling a bit humble at this stage, believe it or not, and I said to him, "Well, I'll have to give it to you. You were prepared after all this time to admit that I got you out." Yeah. I forget his name. The third guy was a guy, Abbas, I think. Mm-hmm. But, one further thing. Mm-hmm. I never got the batting prize at secondary school, but I got the bowling prize.
There we go. So there was some early promise.
And I did play one or two Sunday league matches, and I was used as a fourth bowler or a part-timer there for a while. Then I went a bit in the back, and I thought, well, there's no point in messing around with it. I mean, I'd only be a part-time bowler at this level. I better concentrate on the batting.
But it's quite a brave thing to take off to England at 19, do that year of qualification in the second 11, and then go back the next season. By 1968, you're in the senior side at Worcestershire, where you'll stay for 15 seasons on the trot, where you never made fewer than 1,100 runs in a year. An extraordinary county career, but it starts with having that boldness to be willing to take the risk to go to the other side of the world.
It's interesting, yeah, that what happened is Billy Abdullah, Khalid Ismail Mohammadi Badullah, who was coaching for Otago in Dunedin when I was still at school, of course, and he talent scouted me, you might say. Not that I think he was sent out to do that at all. He just he arranged coaching for me and a small group of us down at the Logan Park nets down there near the university, and it was a sort of a 6:30 in the morning job. And fairly quickly, he and I were the only ones that were going down there. And he would bowl to me in the nets and throwdowns and all that, you know. He arranged, when he came back for 3 or 4 years in a row, and he said, "Look, I reckon I can get you trials at Warwickshire." And I thought, I knew nothing about county cricket at that stage. And it sounded like a good idea, and I thought, shit. And a few people said, well, who does Turner think he is, to go over and play there? In other words, it was a bit of a put down there. And I thought, well, why not? But just before I was due to leave, Billy had to tell me that they'd already signed their 2 overseas players, but they would organise trials for other counties for me when I got there. And when I got there, it was obviously pre-season, and I was in the nets, and MJK Smith, Mike Smith, who was playing for England at that time, I think he was captaining Warwickshire, he came and bowled to me. And I thought, I'm a 19-year-old nobody from down the other end of the world sort of thing. And this guy's prepared to bowl to me. I thought that was pretty good. And then they organised trials at Lancashire, Surrey and Worcester. And I went down to Worcester first. It was wettish nets and that, and ball was turning, and Norman Gifford and Norman bowling. And one thing I could do was defend pretty well. Wasn't a big striker of the ball. I just tried to occupy the crease, and they seemed impressive with my defensive skills. And I got offered a contract there, so I didn't go to the other places for the trials that had been organised.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd got picked up at Warwickshire instead? Because it's such a success with Worcestershire. Do you ever think about what the other road might have looked like?
Yeah. They had more money than a lot of counties, which meant that they could buy them their side. You see, they had Rowan Canai was one of the guys there at the time. They had flat pitches, but of course Worcester wasn't too bad either. And I remember when I was getting some stick for not playing for New Zealand here and so on, and they're trying to put you down and so on. Oh, well, he played at Worcestershire, therefore, you know, hundreds at Worcester and so on. I went, it's no wonder. So I thought, I wonder if there's truth in that. And I looked it up, and I got 2 fewer ones at Worcester than outside of Worcester. Yes! But Warwickshire, yeah, was really flat. I think I got 300s over a long weekend at Edgbaston. Yeah, so it was a really good pitch.
Going to England and coming back on a ship for a young kid like yourself, I know, I mean, you would go on to become, like you were referred to as the first professional of your era, but what was it like to pack up everything and go, okay, I'll see you in 6 months?
Well, of course, it was a year and a half, because having to qualify residentially for a year extended it out. I was interested. It sounded like a damn good idea.
Something to do, right?
Well, yeah, I suppose. But I concentrated on sport because I got a trial for the South Island in hockey before I left. So that came into the picture. I ended up playing for Worcestershire for that winter that I had to spend there in qualifying. No, I didn't think it was that brave. As I said earlier, it meant I was going to be travelling around the world, and that appealed to me, even if I failed with getting a contract.
Those long ship voyages, I mean, it's something that it's hard for us to imagine, I think, these days. What was that experience actually like?
But I flew first time I went.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
In 1969, so I went there in 67, I went back by sea on that occasion.
Right.
And actually, I was in sea deck or whatever that was, providing limited ballast. But yeah, and there was another one of our guys, New Zealand cricketers, Dave O'Sullivan, bowled left arm spin. He ended up with down the south coast with Hampshire. Eventually, he was further up, and there was a spare bed in his room, and so I shifted very quickly from sea deck up to there. So that helped. Yeah, so I had some company, I suppose you could say. 30 odd days, went through Panama that way.
Right. Yeah.
Almost got killed in Fiji on the way. Well, when I say that, it sounds a bit of an exaggeration, but you judge. We stopped in Suva with our first stopover, and I decided I'd get a taxi and have a look around the place. I got in this taxi, and when he's driving along, and just in front there was a truck with a big tray on it, was backing out in front of us, but stopped. And so the driver thought he'd seen us, and he went to go round him, and then the guy came back again, and it's the best bouncer I've ever ducked. The tray came through the window, and I ducked under it.
Christ almighty.
Yeah.
You cut the taxi ride short, I suspect.
Oh, well, yes, that sort of finished it, really.
1969, that's your big test entree. You beat the West Indies in a test here, you draw a series with them in New Zealand, you play test cricket in England, and then later in the year you go to India and Pakistan and play there as well. That's quite the whirlwind introduction into international cricket for someone who you've been finding your feet in the domestic game for a few seasons, sure, but suddenly it's all of this at once.
On reflection, because I lived in the moment like most youngsters, bulletproof, and drank too much and travelled as fast as you could in the cars on the motorways to get from A to B, da-di-da-di-da. It was very educational because, coming from southern New Zealand, for a start, you didn't see many brown faces. You didn't see many people from different parts of the world. So our dressing room, when I looked around our dressing room, there was one guy that was from Worcestershire. And that probably wasn't that unusual because of the fact that you could have overseas players. But it was limited to two. But then guys like Basil D'Oliveira, Cape Coloured, he qualified for England, so he did count as an overseas player. Ron Headley, the son of the Black Bradman, as they called it, George, who incidentally, when I was in Jamaica, looked me up. Yeah, because I opened the batting with his son for so long at that point. He came in to say hi, which was nice. But Ronnie, of course, was brought up largely in Birmingham. So where do y'all come from, our kid? Oh, wow, you're my good one. How they talk, the Brummies. And that coming from a foreign face, if you like, was the first time I'd experienced that. You expect someone to be talking with a West Indian accent or something.
I mean, meeting George Headley, that's an extraordinary thing to have happen.
I mean, I was actually having a kip on the physio's table because I didn't go for much treatment. I wasn't keen on that. Unfortunately, I hung together pretty well. But yeah, anyway, I was there, and then this head came against mine. And I thought, who's that? And it was him. And he introduced himself, because I didn't know who the heck he was initially. And in fact, I was wondering why he was getting so close to me. And that was just a friendship part of his, I suppose. Coming back to the dressing room, though, towards the end, we had Yunus Ahmed, who had shifted from Surrey, and he travelled around in my car. And Van Bernholder was my best mate for years, actually. And he didn't have a driving licence, so he travelled around with him. We roomed together as well, and so we changed next to each other sort of thing. So he was there, and Ron Headley was there, and Basil was over there.
Right.
And then there was another Indian lad who bowled some off spinners for us. He didn't play a lot. He was in there, and I suppose you count Yorkshiremen as foreigners.
Well, they count everyone from outside Yorkshire as foreigners.
Yes, well, nothing exists south of the Watford Gap in the UK.
Right.
From the Southerners thinking that. And certainly the Yorkies, very parochial. So it introduced me to not only briefly to other cultures, but you were living with them day in and day out. You're in the same changing room, you're on the same sporting field, you're going to the same hotels, so it was really an education to get into each other's minds and how they function.
Right.
And any possible prejudice that I might have had gone. I'm not suggesting that I really had it, I just didn't know.
Right.
But the education that really was beneficial to me, and I'm really thankful for that happening.
And it's quite the education on those tours. You make your first test ton in Pakistan, but probably more importantly, you meet Sukhinder in India. That you must have just gone past 50 years of marriage.
That's
I reckon.
That's right.
So you
in July.
You're only 20.
Last year,
yeah, July. That adds up. So you're 22 when you meet, and then you spend a few years. It takes you a few years to get to the point of getting married. What goes on in that time? Are you writing letters? Are you managing to visit India? Are you like what? How does that work? How do you keep that flame alive?
Well, I'll leave it up to your discretion as to how you edit this, the answers I'm about to give you. It was my first tour in 1969, and we started in Bombay, so we had nets there for a few days. Then we played the universities as our opening game. And then we were supposed to play the first test in Ahmedabad, but they had Hindu and Muslim rioting there, and so they said stay in Bombay and you'll play there. And where I'm getting to with this is, instead of, most teams touring don't stay more than a week anywhere, I ended up with just over 20 odd days in Bombay. So I got to know some of the local lads, and I said, can you fix me up? Oh. As you do. Although in a protected culture like that, as I'm sure you'll understand, wasn't the easiest thing, and chaperoned, of course. Well, first of all, what happened is they fixed me up with a lass in a Taj Mahal Hotel discotheque.
Oh, yes.
And she wanted to dance where everyone could see her, and I wasn't into dancing much. And I just wanted to have a chat. When I went back to these guys the next day or two, I said, now come on, fix me up with someone that can put two words together, I can have a chat with. And that's where they fixed up Suki. And that was our first meeting. But the story goes on a bit. Do you want to ask a question in between times here?
No, my only question is, coming from India, even that, the whole setting up bit, would not have been very straightforward. I mean, no. I know your now wife had gone to the US, and she'd been exposed to the Western world, but even for her to have this random New Zealander walk up to her and
random New Zealander
with some cricket credentials.
Yeah, but being a Sudani, as a Sikh woman, cricket wasn't big in Punjab at that time. Hockey was, yes. So cricket wasn't really the attraction, I don't think. You'd have to ask her that now. I haven't gone there. But her father was a squadron leader in the Indian Air Force, and then he moved on to Air India, as a lot of them do. The mother was more approving of her doing it than he was, so I had to wait for him to go on a flight. And what happened is that then, after the first outing, I rang up again to take her out again, you see, and he picked up the phone this time. Ooh. He said, "Who are you?" And I introduced myself, and I said, I just rang to ask your daughter out for a date. That won't happen, he says. Words to that effect. And that was it. The phone went down. So once again, I had to wait for him to go on another flight. And then what happened is she got a, what do you call it, not a sponsorship, to go to the States to study. And so what was happening is that I, on my trip back and forth, called in.
Right. Smart.
Yeah. And that extended things a bit. And then when I was touring the West Indies, it's not that far away where she was. So I flew her down to Barbados. It was the only island I didn't score any runs on. I'll move on from that. Yes, well, crikey, you might have to take this bit out. But what had happened, the evening she arrived, or the afternoon she arrived, that day I'd been hit on the foot on the full toss on the foot, and I couldn't put my foot down, and I thought, Jesus, I'm not going to be able to bat tomorrow. But I woke up, and it was good as gold. But I could have been fresher.
Just on that, courting an Indian woman back then, you found ways around it, but convincing this former Air Force fellow and a Sikh guy as well,
yes,
that his daughter can marry you. At a time, I've read that he said, "No, don't trust these boys from the West. They're statistically bad." That cannot have been easy.
Yeah. Yes, well, it goes on a bit. During the vacation period, I was keen for her to come over to Worcester during the vacation in the States. At that point, he was very keen to meet this New Zealander. And it was during a test match at Trent Bridge, because it was the New Zealand were touring. They didn't play on Sundays. I came down with a scorer who was from London on that Sunday. Once again, I was naive about the culture. They had some rallies that they were staying with, which was near Heathrow, where there's quite a big Indian Pakistani community, Hounslow or somewhere like that. I went into the room, and there's quite a few people in the room. I thought, am I being interviewed here? I just said to him out of naivety, I said, well, I just wanted Suki to come up to Worcester and live with me there. He said, well, when are you going to marry my daughter? I coughed and spluttered a little. I hadn't thought of that at that stage, but it didn't sound like such a bad idea. And but then I dug the hole a bit deeper, because I said, well, I'm not sure when I can do this. I'm not sure when I can fit it in. And so I said, I got my fixture list out, because I had it with me. Yeah, and because it was right near the end of New Zealand finishing their tour, and they had got through to the Benson and Hedges Cup final at Lord's, and so I was selected for that, and that was going to happen on the Saturday, I think. On the Sunday, I was to play for Worcestershire at Byfleet against Surrey, but what I didn't realise at the time was that if the match was rained off that day, or part of it, you had to go back on the Monday and finish it. Well, I'd arranged that Monday was the free day that I could manage it. And then, of course, I'm sweating over the fact that if it doesn't turn out like that, I've started the game. And in those days, you felt duty-bound to meet your employer's requirements, and things like marriage, children, going to the births, and all this sort of thing. It didn't happen then much, but it was still going to be awkward. And it was 1,000 runs in May year 1973, and I'd had a lot of publicity, and I didn't tell our guys that I was getting married. But I had to have someone to sign, so I got the manager and our skipper. Bevan Congdon was our skipper on that tour, and so they came along to the Gurdwara. Oh, really? Yes, in Southall. Obviously I had to put the turban on, but he'd tied me a turban, so I sat it on there. And you sit in front of the Granth Sahib, the Holy Book, and the Granthi does readings from it, and there's a guy on a harmonium and whatever playing these tunes, and he's reciting from the Holy Book, and then you stand up and you go around it 3 times. You have your hands here in front of you, because people who are attending put money into your hands, and they circle your head with it. And at that moment I thought, I was getting married in England. They had to be a minimum of £1 note. I wish I'd invited the whole team because that would have really, I'd have enjoyed that, But that's the money, half of it's taken by her sister to get your shoes back and things like that. It's just traditional,
You mentioned 1,000 runs before the end of May. We might come to that in a moment. The niche cricket statistics. This is partly why we were super keen to talk to you, because on our show Storytime, we meander around and we find these kind of stories, and you come up so often. Glenn Turner pops up in the unusual stats categories. You had a remarkable ability to knock these off. So I've got a few of these that I want to tick through, just to get your memories on these situations. Arcane stats categories that interest us. One, carrying your bat. We're very interested in those sort of innings. You did it twice in a test match. What I like about this is that you have the third lowest score carrying a bat with the 43 not out at Lords, and you have the third highest score carrying a bat with 223 in Kingston, which was the highest at the time, but Alistair Cook and Tom Latham have gone past you since then. I mean, the Lords one, you're facing deadly Derek Underwood. You're still a kid, really, at that stage, on a wet pitch. It's doing all sorts. How do you know how to play a bowler of that sort of guile and try to survive in those conditions?
Yeah, well, I mean, I worked hard on technique, and because I started so young, I anticipated that the opposition should be better than me. And the first one I faced was New Zealand's top opening bowler at the time, and I thought they should be able to get me out. So I worked really hard on technical things, and Billy helped out with that. Knowing where your off stump is and what you need to play or what you can let go is a critical element as far as especially opening the batting or playing on turning pitches. I think it's fair to say I got pretty good at that. Those deliveries that are on that awkward length and a line where do I play it or don't I play it, those are the ones that can get you out. Yeah, my focus had been on defence. I remember in my first season as a 16-year-old for Otago against Central Districts, I got 3 in a morning session of 2 hours.
Oof.
But I never, you'd think you'd nick the odd one past slip, or I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Everything was in the middle of the bat, silly mid off, silly mid on. They were circled around me, sort of thing. And we were in a very strong side, and a guy at the other end was getting the runs. So I was doing a bit of a job, not just a selfishness, I hasten to add. And after lunch, I went out and hit the first ball for 4, which more than doubled my score. Vic Pollard, off spinner, was bowling. Yeah, so coming back to Deadly Underwood. Yeah, I mean, one that was turning, he was the best in the business because he bowled it so quickly. Left arm round and off quite a long run. But we also had at Worcester Norman Gifford, who also took quite a long run. So I had practice against him as well. Yeah. And it was, I mean, the others got out pretty quickly. I mean, I only scored, as you say, 43, was it? Yeah. Do you want me to go into the others?
Yeah, well, the second one's interesting. It's Sobers and Gibbs bowling. It's the famous match, Lawrence Rowe's famous debut, where he makes the double and the 100 in the second innings. It's a draw, obviously. But, you know, it's a pretty remarkable test match to play in.
Yeah. They had a big left armour. He wasn't too bad. I forget his name. And then they had Uten Dow, a short guy who was nippy, and he bowled a good bouncer because he bowled what we call a skidder bouncer. You know, he wasn't steep bounce, it was there. What was happening is that we probably especially being in the West Indies and early days of New Zealand cricket for winning test matches and so on, that if we could draw test matches, it was like a victory for us. So it became an endurance test, really, is to bat long periods of time under hot conditions, because Kingston's hot, like Georgetown and Guyana. But I'll just tell you something in addition to that. Headley Howarth, he came in, he was batting with me right at the end, and he could hold a bat. Of a left-arm spinner, and this guy Dow and co was bowling bouncers at him and so on, and that was in the non-helmet days. And I went down at the end of an over and said, look, let's swap ends. I'll take this guy, obviously. And not likely, he said. You just carry on with your batting there, he said. When he's bowling that stuff at me, I'll just chest him away or whatever. He said, don't worry about me. I thought that was gutsy, you know. No helmets then. Yeah, so anyway, that we put on a few, I think, and yeah, that was that one. But I'll tell you about another one.
Go on.
I was last man out at Headingley. We were 9 down, I think, overnight. And there was still another full day's play, there was plenty of time left in the game. And we just tried to hang on in case it rained the next day at Headingley. Went out the next morning. I got a big nip backer bowled at me. Top of the flaps. Charlie Elliott. Dickie Bird came into the dressing room afterwards and said, I got a telling off from him the night before because, especially in number 11, had been hit on his pad often enough. Why the bloody hell didn't you give him out? We could have been off bloody home. Game was over. Yeah. And he apologised because he said that was a bloody rough decision. He was known as a bit of a batsman's umpire. You know, if he gave you out, you probably thought it was pretty plumb.
Another stat that comes up a lot is, and we love talking about it on Storytime, is symmetry. And you spoke about the West Indies tour and making 259 at Boda against Guyana and then doing it again in the test match. But there's also this great symmetry about the number of test matches you played and the number of one-day internationals that you played. 41.
Yeah.
So, and for the longest time, you had one of the best records in World Cup cricket. I mean, you dominated 75, and then you dominated 79 and almost took New Zealand to the final. And then obviously you came back and played in the 1983 World Cup. But just the 171 not out against East Africa and just one-day cricket, like for someone who was criticized for playing too slowly at the start, for you to dominate that format, like how do you look back at that?
I'd say by 1970, I think I got a couple of thousand in that season, something like that. I was scoring at a decent pace, decent clip. But as time went on, I just wanted to get better. And getting better meant scoring more quickly, but not giving it away. So working out, a fuller range of attacking shots. And what I found after a while is some of the county bowlers started bowling short at me because I was seen as a good front foot player. And I didn't want that to happen because what they do then is that they bowl your bouncer, they know you're going to let it go, just to keep you off strike. Or bowl one early to you, short into your hip, that you took one down to deep fine leg. And once again, you're losing the strike, and they seem to be happy about that. If I was playing well, if they bowled short at me, I didn't like hooking. And I suppose coming from New Zealand, I hadn't developed that much because of up and downness and more seaming type wickets. And so to prevent that happening, I gave myself room to free my arms because I felt I had more control over it, offside. And I even got accused at one stage of being afraid of the ball because you gave yourself some room. And I thought, how ridiculous. You open the batting day in and day out, and if you're frightened of the cricket ball, you'd be having nightmares all your bloody life.
You're in the wrong job.
So, anyway, so that's where that came from. Yeah, Bob Willis, I remember him at Worcester doing this, and I was having quite a bit of success quite quickly with the short stuff. And he criticised me in an article that came out in the paper that I wasn't setting a very good example for the younger players. Right. And I thought, well, are you, mate? Haven't you found over time that generally someone who fires a criticism is guilty of the very same thing they're critical of?
Very, very often the case.
Yes. Yeah.
The 1,000 runs before the end of May. I mean, this is a bloody rare achievement. This is 8 players have done it. Bradman did it twice because he was a show-off. You and Graham Hick are the only ones since World War II to have done it. Nobody's done it since. No one probably will. They don't play enough first-class cricket anymore.
That's right.
It's an extraordinary achievement, and it's 73. It's the year you were talking about before, where you're also preoccupied with when you're going to get married and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I didn't do so well in the Test series.
Right.
Bloody marriage must have gotten away. No, go on.
But you look back at that achievement now. Does it mean more to you now than it did then? Does it mean less?
I try and keep a level psychologically, and not ups and downs. And it saves you from the downs, even though some would say, well, give yourself a chance to really enjoy something and celebrate. What? Celebrate? I'm a doer, not a bloody celebrator. at the end of something and reflecting on it, you think, well, I'm glad I did that rather than not doing it. And the thing that put it more into my mind, particularly towards the end when I got closer, the media was following it. And this things kept coming up all the time, you see. And Bish and Beatty was playing for them. And I remember saying to him, I got to know Bish quite well, I said, I wondered whether a Sikh was going to be my downfall, both at home and on the cricket field. Yeah. So anyway, I think I might have got the runs off him, the final ones, with a square slash. Yeah. Anyway, if you've had a very successful day or innings and you go in and when you're taking your pads off, you can purr a little, I use that term. Even that's a bit self-indulgent, really. I shouldn't be admitting that, really, should I? Christ, man.
Don't want to admit that you felt good about doing something well.
Well, you're trying to get better.
Sure. But you also don't want to be a complete ascetic, self-flagellation kind of merchant. No,
I didn't tell myself off.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. We're finding the middle ground there.
Yeah.
Okay. Geez, you'll have to write my script.
There's somewhere between asceticism and hedonism where you can find a happy
balance. Oh, yes, but you can be contented with something without blurting it out.
And you can be content without being jubilant, I suppose.
Yes, another good way of putting it. Thank you. Also, I don't know whether it's because I couldn't care what nationality I am, frankly. But my mother was from Scots background and my father was from English. But when I say background, they were both born in New Zealand. But that's where you go back to. And my mother, if people praised her, she got embarrassed. She almost wanted to tell them off or deny it. No, And I remember saying to her when she was 90-odd, I think, I said, Mum, you're still doing that. When someone praises you or says something in front of you nice about you, just say thank you and the problem will go away. It took me until probably my mid-30s or more, longer, before I got round to doing that, because I had those same feelings that she had.
In an interview many years ago, Glenn, you spoke about how that could come across as you not being a good teammate, because you said that you'd struggle to fit into the modern era where you're supposed to encourage everyone, every ball, and feel joy for every wicket, run up and hug everyone. That wasn't who you were.
No, not at all.
You struggled to do that?
I'm glad that didn't happen. I'd have struggled with that, I think. But when something becomes normalised, there starts to be a certain obligation, it seems to be. And you get somebody like Williamson, who I feel I've got more in common with him, say, of current players. But he's still giving glove love. He probably feels an obligation. I mean, if your colleague comes up to you and does that, you're going to tell him to piss off. You sort of say, yeah, okay.
It just becomes automatic.
But I don't think he's into the big hugs and that. And if he does high fives, I haven't noticed it. Maybe he does. But, running in, I put it crudely, actually. Guys running in from deep fine leg or the boundary or something, you've just taken the first wicket. The expression is premature ejaculation.
Yeah. I think
the job is not done.
Yeah, 9 more to go. Yeah. The 1,000 runs before May in 73, and then Worcestershire win the county championship in 74. Is there a different kind of satisfaction to having that county success compared to the team than playing well for the national team, having the national team doing well? Did that feel different playing county cricket to playing for New Zealand?
No, because you see, one of the comments that come out from time to time that irk you a little bit is well, Turner, and it will apply to others too, I suppose, he's got to look up on the scoreboard to see who he's playing for. It was almost frowned upon that how could you possibly give your all for New Zealand when you're playing for this other team or that. You know, I went on international wanderers teams into South Africa and Rhodesia and so on. Whoever you were playing for, you gave it your best shot. And the motivations vary with people, and most people, I would suggest, have a number of motivations, some more than others. It's all a matter of degrees. So which is the main motivation as to driving force in yourself? And I just wanted to be as good as I could be. And if you've got any integrity, you will automatically do the right thing of those around you. The people that I've found that are the biggest talkers about king and country and I'm a team man and I'm this and I'm that, generally are the least so.
Well, if you have to talk about it, then it's less likely to be true, right? People who tell you about their good qualities are the ones who aren't confident that those qualities are substantial enough to be seen.
Yeah. Helping to win a game for Worcestershire or New Zealand, I suppose the one that we celebrated the other day had a bit more significance because it was the first time. Yes. And it was against the big neighbour who was supposed to be better than us.
For those catching up, so that's 74 in Christchurch when New Zealand beat Australia for the first time. That's another one of our stats categories. We love twin tons. We're always talking about twin tons. You make 200s against Australia in that game. Your first hundreds on home soil as well. So you've made 3 test tons away by that point, but you haven't made one in New Zealand, if I'm remembering the stats right. And you knock off Australia in a seesawing kind of pretty low-scoring game where your contributions are absolutely crucial. You're in the run chase, New Zealand 3 for not many. I mean, that's a big deal. It was interesting. So there was a function before the Christchurch Test for the 50th anniversary. You and most of the surviving teammates who were there. It's interesting how the rivalry is still tangible. You know, there's still some real tension between when that Australian team comes up. It didn't seem entirely put on. That's all.
I see. I think maybe it's changing a little bit because guys now are playing in teams with others from other places.
There's a bit of that in county cricket, though, wasn't there?
Well, yes, but I'm just thinking, you know, with the 20 over stuff and that. Some of the players know each other from other teams and are more likely to be civil, if you like, or not get so much into the sledging, I imagine. But look, it happens the world over in everyday life, where it's your nearest neighbour who is the one that you want to beat, if you like.
You and Ian Chappell have had it in for each other for a long time, but there is a lot of values, if you want to call it that you shared, that players should be paramount in a game. I mean, players should be paid a lot more money. They should be professionals. So there was those things that you agreed upon. World Series cricket, like, I mean, that came around at your peak, like that never happened. Was there an option for you, or did they come to you?
I never got invited.
Were you surprised? I mean, you had great one-day numbers.
Well, put it this way, I was scoring more runs than anyone else at the time here. John Morrison got invited. Bob Cunis got invited from New Zealand. I think, were they the only two? Yeah, well, obviously, yeah, fair enough. That was Richard, I take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I would have gone and played, I imagine. You know, I didn't feel as though I would have been putting 2 fingers up to the establishment, and if necessary, I've done that anyway.
Well, I was about to say you wouldn't have minded. That's the thing that I see where I see you and Ian Chappell having something in common, is that you both took on the establishment in your own countries in order to push back for the rights of players. That's where I see you two as being most in accord.
Oh, I see. Because I mean, we haven't had. There was only really that incident. I played with him. Richie Benno took a side over to South Africa, and I think he called it an International Wanderers or something like that. and Ian Chappell was there at that time. We actually batted together, if you can call it together, when you're 22 yards apart. It was just the way he carried on at Lancaster Park on that day was unacceptable as far as I was concerned. You know, I mean, not just the language, but abusing the umpire, and then obviously making assumptions that I should have shut up because what's it got to do with me? Well, I was playing the same game, and he probably didn't realise that my motivation was to just get it right. It wasn't trying to help them, which effectively it did, or help me.
The number one Glenn Turner stats category that comes up for us, the percentage of runs in a completed innings. The first class Bannerman, this is real nerd level stuff, but we love this. Obviously, there's the Bannerman 67.35% from the first test match. You've got the equivalent and bettered him in first class cricket. I mean, these numbers are worth running through again. You make 141 out of a team total of 169. The other scores in your team's 11 are 1, 3, 5, 3, 0, 4, 0, 4, 7 and 0. There is one leg by, so the other 10 batters make 27 runs to your 141. That involves 14 scoring shots for everybody else in the team. Malcolm Nash, the guy who gets hit for 6 sixes in an over at one point, bowls 31
overs, yeah. 31 at Swansea, same ground.
31 overs at 1 run per over and takes 3 for. Glamorgan still don't win the game because it rains. You have scored 83.4% of the runs in an innings. It is, I mean, it sounds almost comical to read it back, but you were actually there. It was a real game of cricket. It did happen. It sounds like someone made it up.
Look, I tell you what, if you play often enough, opportunity can come. And then if you have opportunity, also, you know, what happened around me created that situation. I mean, they got out, not me. Well, let me go through it a little bit with you. I think I was not out overnight, a dozen or 15 or something like that. I got a visit out of the blue from Bob Blair, who opened the bowling for New Zealand way back. Mm-hmm. I played against him once, I think, so it was right at the end of his career. He was up playing in the Lancashire Leagues, and he brought down 2 young Aussies with him. We got into the booze. And I drank too much, too quickly, because it was only something like 10:30 or something. I didn't even say goodnight to them. I couldn't speak without really slurring, so I just buggered off, you know. It was still reasonably early, so I got a fair amount of the night. It's whether you're unconscious or whether you're sleeping. So that was the lead-in to the match. If they'd swabbed me, I'd have been struggling.
An ideal preparation.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Not, did you say?
No,
yeah. Well, it proved to be.
Maybe
I should have done it more often. Anyway, guys kept getting out. It was a flat deck, good pitch. So there was no excuses for that number of wickets being lost. Yeah. Then what came up was to get past the follow-on. So there were 2 things happening with circumstance, those 2 things. We're losing wickets and getting past the follow-on. So then guys started to play for me a bit, and obviously I tried to dominate the strike and so on. I think I remember Norman Gifford nicking a 4. And I thought, oh, shit. No, I thought later on, at the time I wasn't conscious of this being a world record or whatever, or Guinness Book of Records or anything.
You know, you're unlikely to be calculating that in your head while you
bat. No, exactly. Well, my name wasn't Richard Hadley. He could go to 2 decimal points after every wicket he took. But yeah, so that helped get us closer. But I think we got comfortably passed by 10 or 20 runs or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they batted again after that, and there's rain, I think, and it peters out. pretty much as a
right.
Contest-wise. But yeah, it's a great curiosity. It's a great but it makes it look like it was absolutely unplayable and you were a genius.
Well, so. Exactly. You see, that's the thing. But quite often, true stories bring a different perspective to it and a reality to it. I mean, I could have bullshitted to you and, oh, yeah, it was doing this, doing that.
Yeah.
But I'm not a good liar.
Well, it's not a great skill to have for the most part. We've got one more stats category here.
Okay.
100 hundreds, which, again, like the 1,000 before the end of May, probably no one will do it again. Mark Ramprakash was the last one in 2008.
Yeah.
You're the only player to ever do it with a triple. 311, you make 300 in a day. I mean, it's interesting because...
Geez, you missed a not out, Well,
it's sort of, obviously it's late in your career, but this is the defining point of the evolution, because you talk about being that stonewaller in your younger days.
Oh, yeah.
You become a more attacking player quite early in your career, really. It's not at the end. But to slice off 300 in a day is no small thing. The other mob are batting before stumps on day one. It's this extraordinary...
Did they have 20 minutes?
Yeah, something like that.
It's normally about 20 minutes. So they declare half an hour before, which gives them 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I didn't think... I was surprised with myself a bit, because I didn't think I could score 300 in a day. Notice how Bob Willis and the other guy who did open for bowling for England a bit too, he was playing. Gladstone Small. Yeah, they were playing. But I noticed Bob only bowled 9 or 12 overs or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it was a flat deck.
Wasn't enjoying it.
No. So I thought, so you can boast a bit about saying they had those two England players playing, but they cut their bowling short.
Much of them. But Billy brings you out the glass of champagne, doesn't he? Or is that
my gin and tonic was my tipple.
Gin and tonic.
But it was a treble.
It was a triple gin.
Oh yeah. Bugger.
Was that at 100? So that's when you get to 100, right?
Yeah.
So you make 211 more runs after the triple gin.
Well, yeah, it might have just lined me up a bit. Right? Once again, if they'd swabbed me, I'd have been done again. Gin and tonic, ice no lemon.
Yeah, we're developing a theme here in terms of when your best performances, when you've been limbered up a bit, it seems.
Yeah, but this was at the time, this one. Yeah. Well, what do you do? You got to drink it, haven't you?
Sure. But that's another one looking back on it. I imagine maybe it means more to you now than it did then. But
no, it surprised me at the time. So I suppose surprise and enjoyment go hand in hand, do they?
Well, surprise is more likely to make you express enjoyment, perhaps.
Jesus, he's not bad, eh?
He's a wordsmith.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. Yeah.
That's a controversial sort of period in your life and your career where you've said, to heck with you, New Zealand, I'm playing county cricket. And then you do come back and play a few test matches in that 1983 World Cup.
It's a pretty long story as to how this eventuated, and I don't know how far one goes into it. But basically, one was dealing with... a board who hell-bent on retaining the amateur ethos. And I was really the first pro cricketer. I mean, there were a few others who had gone and played county cricket. They didn't come back and play here. So a guy like John Reid did, but he just played league cricket rather than county cricket. So I guess I was the first to break most of the ice. But it became... I mean, as Dick Brittenden wrote in one of his books, I think he got it pretty right. Because of this, I was never going to be the pin-up boy for New Zealand cricket, and I made sure of that. That didn't worry me. But what brassed me off was being vilified. And every move I made, they went out of their way to be critical of it. And one in particular... I'd been selected with Richie Beno had got in touch with us about going to South Africa, and that was right after the final game We played the final against Canterbury at Lancaster Park, and I was captain of Otago. And what happened there is they decided that you could win the game on the first innings. Well, Canterbury dominated the game to such an extent, they had such a long lead, there was no way that we beat them. That got to a stage halfway through the match, let's say. I'd been with our selectors selecting the side for the tour coming up of Pakistan and India. And they were just getting my opinion. And I knew that Peter Petherick had been selected for the first time. He lived just down the road here. He worked in Alexandria, came from Ranfurly. Country boy, was 32 or something like that before he got selected, probably because Gren Alabaster was the spinner ahead of him. I knew that he'd been selected. He couldn't bat his eyelids. I mean, he couldn't he couldn't defend himself, you know, and it was no helmets then either. And he was a number 11 of all number 11s. And Dale Hadley in particular, they started bouncing him. And it was ridiculous. And I thought, geez, they'll kill him. And so I declared 9 down. And it was way behind them. Well, I got some stick, as you can imagine, for that. And then what happened is, because I was going off on this other trip and the game was over, I batted myself at number 6. And apparently there was the boss man at the game, cigarette people, and because it was the final and that, it was I was blamed for the game being a bit farcical. He was going to offer me a job apparently, and I'm glad it didn't happen in retrospect, because, you know, the smoking thing and all that. Because Richie, when I was going, they were going to pay for my airfare back to England and then back to New Zealand. New Zealand at the time were giving me 1 airfare, not for my wife. And so I thought, crikey, I'll find out if they'd be prepared to pay for Suki or use my fare for her. And so I rang up the secretary and he said, oh, that shouldn't be a problem, you know. Oh, no, that's fine, just do it, you know. The word got around that this bastard Turner had left his wife in New Zealand, and New Zealand cricket had to fork out an airfare for her, you see. Now, because what happened is the chairman, he was the main problem, had said that he hadn't agreed to this happening. All right, I got to England, and New Zealand were about to tour England, but straight away they asked for that airfare to be paid back. And I said, well, when I get back to New Zealand, I'll pay it back to you. No, we want it now. And they got Suki in, the chairman got Suki in back here, this is going back a step now, I'd taken off to South Africa, got her in and gave her a bollocking about her husband and so on. And at that point I'd had enough. They sent over 3 board members, the chairman and 2 others, to meet with me and the chairman of Worcestershire County Cricket Club. They also wanted me to play for New Zealand on that tour and felt that they had the rights over me rather than Worcestershire. And the chairman, who happened to be quite a good friend of mine, I don't know whether that made a difference or not, because he was a professional man, we said, no, I'm going to stay and play for Worcester. And I thought to myself, the one chance I've got of making some money was having that benefit year and being present. Yeah. And yet they were prepared to take that away as well. So they had already said that I couldn't play for New Zealand until I gave the airfare back. Anyway, at that point, I sacked them.
Right. Well, that was the end of the road until there was some sort of change.
Then what happened is Bob Vance took over New Zealand cricket. Yeah. Vance Vivian, businessman, big clothing company and so on in Wellington, a man of the world, and he knocked on my door and got me back playing again.
Right. And then, so the part after you've finished playing, where you're the manager in 85-6, you end up as a selector in a couple of stints. So you've got this long involvement. You keep coming back. Is part of that you wanting to stick it up that establishment and prove your dedication to New Zealand cricket as part of that, responding to that criticism that you weren't dedicated enough?
No, not at all. I wanted. I mean, I played the game for such a long time. I was still very interested in the game, and I thought I could make a contribution. You know, it wasn't holding a grudge. I mean, they made life pretty miserable for me at the time, and I couldn't sell any cricket bats here and so on. You know, that sort of thing, and I was afraid to take my son to cricket, right. And there were a few things that affected me in that way, but. Other than that, no, I mean, I was keen to keep involved, yeah.
Two things stand out about your 2 tenures, or you had a few tenures as manager/coach of the New Zealand team. Ian Smith had a story the other day on commentary about the Brisbane Test, the famous one, where you lined all 11 of them, the New Zealand players, and said to each one of them that you're better than your counterpart in the Australian team and you can win this Test match. Like, you said to Bruce Edgar, for example, you're better than Andrew Hilditch, and so on and so forth. And they did it. And Ian Smith said nobody was happier than Glenn Turner when we did win the match. He was there, waiting for us at the dressing room balcony at the Gabba. So it doesn't really match up with how you react to successes in life. But do you remember lining them up and kind of giving them that pep talk?
Well, the thing is that it was easy for me to do that because I believed it. I mean, at one stage, I don't know if that was the stage, but at one stage when I was playing, the Ashes were was for the wooden spoon. Australia were weak and England were weak. Now, but because I'd found that as a player coming back, and I mentioned it the other night, I think that because I'd played so much in England and against the better players around the world, I didn't have the same feeling as they had. They felt overawed playing against Australia, and I didn't. So anyway, coming back to that particular situation, there was a guy, the other Reid, JF Reid, not JR Reid. And he was renowned, he opened the batting, and he was a bit renowned for not fancying it and didn't really rate himself that highly. And so playing on a bouncy wicket in Brisbane, which they always seem to turn up with, I got him to one side and certainly gave him that line about, look, these guys aren't that bloody good. You can do this. And now, I wasn't really into being a big motivator. I was into try and improve people's game. That's where I focused. But on this particular occasion, I was able to really get stuck into something I truly believed in, and that we could do it. And Paddles Hadley has given me a compliment. Well, it's just as a batting, when you say batting coach, in those days you were the only coach, yeah. For me, all I could do, I wasn't into trying to change bowling actions, and you shouldn't anyway when guys are at that level. If they're going to do that, they have to go through a gradual process and readjust their body, etc., etc. But on this, the Aussies had a lot of left-handers. And what was happening with Paddles bowling right arm over, as usual, and, he was probably mid-crease or a little bit wider naturally, and they were able to let him go too often. And so I said, look, if you can get in and bowl more wicket to wicket, much closer to the stumps, you're coming initially down the line, and initially they feel they've got to play you. And if you can do something off the track from there, you could nick them out or whatever. At practice, I stood as the umpire and had to position myself further back so that he could get used to where he needed the umpire to stand so that he could get closer in on delivery. And so we went through that process. And then he got 9 for. Well, I mean, okay, I'm not taking all the credit for that, but it just, it coincided with, and the fact that they had so many left-handers, and just knowing from a batsman's point of view, the angles and things, I was able to contribute that. So yeah, okay. Smithy praising me, shit.
Yeah. It was unequivocal. Do you still follow Test cricket, or has it sort of drifted out of your life these days?
I watched quite a bit of this one. It depends what I've got on, really. I certainly follow the scores. I'm still pretty active, touch wood, and I don't want to sit in front of the telly all day long. But I've written a book, this latest book.
Glenn Turner and Lynn McConnell.
Yeah.
Cricket's Global Warming.
What it's about is what I think works and what doesn't work. And, with selection, with captaincy and so on. So it's not a book for fans. It's a book for someone who thinks a bit more about the game, I suppose it's fair to say. And it talks about the amateur side of it and having, the differences that occurred at that point and problems with New Zealand cricket and why I think it happened, etc., etc., etc. Basically, Lynn wrote a chapter at the end of it. I sat down and wrote that book myself, whereas the previous ones were ghosted with my brother, who's, the writer and so on. When I say ghosted, I did a lot of notes and that. It wasn't the normal weekend and the guy goes away and does it.
Sure.
But I didn't write them. He wrote those books. And then there was Century of Centuries. Ray Cairns just went through my 100 hundreds.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to be about the kind of things we talk about on this show a lot in terms of the direction of travel for world cricket, the fact that you've got administrators involved who aren't necessarily the people who you want to be running the game, the commodification of cricket. These are all things that we talk about as well. So you might well find your audience with some people on this show. Cricket's Global Warming is the name of the book.
Okay.
So you're somebody who is still thinking a lot about cricket, and it's been a real pleasure. We could talk to you all day, but we probably should let you get on with the rest of your life. But the amount of enjoyment we've had chatting about your career on this show over the years, you wouldn't know about it, but it's been there. And then we've capped it off with this conversation today. So, Glenn Turner, thanks so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming down and joining me here in my pad.